The Senate Banking Committee hearing room fell into complete silence as Tim Scott leaned forward into his microphone with a voice sharp enough to slice through the air, calling out Representative Jasmine Crockett. By asking what she had done for communities besides making noise on social media, his attack was quick, calculated, and aimed to humiliate the Texas Democrat on live television in front of millions watching on C-SPAN. But what happened next stunned everyone in the room, because Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She did not look down. Instead, she smiled a slow, confident smile that made opponents uneasy, because what Tim Scott did not realize was that Crockett had been waiting for this exact moment. She came armed with facts. She had the receipts, and she was ready to deliver a response so powerful that it would leave Senator Scott speechless and make her trend across every major social media platform within minutes. This wasn't just another political disagreement. This was about to become a career-defining takedown, one that would show the nation what happens when real preparation meets perfect opportunities. Senator Scott sat behind his nameplate, assuming he was in control, assuming that the young progressive from Texas would be an easy target. But he was about to learn that underestimating Jasmine Crockett was the biggest political mistake of his career. The irony was thick here with Scott, a man who had carefully built his image as the respectable face of conservative black politics, now about to be publicly dismantled by a woman who had spent her life fighting real battles for justice. The contrast was striking: the establishment politician versus the street-smart fighter, the careful moderate against the unapologetic progressive, the senator who played it safe versus the congresswoman who came to battle. Until that moment, the hearing had followed a routine script: banking regulations committee business, standard political fare. But tension had been rising between Scott and Crockett for weeks over clashing economic policies, especially those affecting black communities. As the highest-ranking black Republican in the Senate, Scott often found himself at odds with Democrats like Crockett, who pushed aggressive reforms to address systemic inequality. That tension exploded into the public sphere 2 weeks earlier when Crockett called out Scott's voting record in a CNN interview, pointing out that he had consistently voted against legislation aimed at helping black family. Scott's office was outraged, firing off press releases and demanding retractions, but Crockett refused to back down, instead doubling down and backing up her claims with detailed proof. So by the time Scott went after her during the hearing, the political powder keg was already lit. Crockett had been calm, focused, taking notes and listening. When Scott decided to make her his target, the cameras were rolling. C-SPAN was broadcasting live, and social media was waiting to erupt to fully understand the weight of this moment. You have to know who these two figures really are and what they represent in American politics. Tim Scott had become a prominent name in GOP circles. As the only black Republican senator, his voice carried serious weight in the party. Born in North Charleston, South Carolina, he had built a political brand on messages of personal responsibility and conservative values, rising from the House to the Senate and even mounting a short-lived presidential bid in 2024. His image was that of a polished statesman, someone who could address racial issues while still upholding party orthodoxy. Supporters saw him as proof that the GOP was inclusive and evolving, but critics accused him of enabling policies that harmed the very communities he claimed to represent. They argued that his moderate image was political cover, that his loyalty to Republican talking points often took precedence over real progress. Over time, Scott had grown comfortable in his position as the GOP's go-to-black, a voice respected by colleagues, praised by conservative media, and rarely challenged head-on. That comfort led to overconfidence, a belief that he could handle any criticism without being rattled. But facing Jasmine Crockett was different. She came from a completely different world and carried a very different mission. A former criminal defense attorney from Dallas, Crockett had been elected in 2022 as part of a new generation of progressive Democrats determined to challenge the system, not join it. At just 42 years old, she had already earned a reputation for refusing to back down, for asking tough questions in hearings that regularly went viral, and for translating complex policy into language the average person could understand. Her time in court had sharpened her instincts. Her mind worked fast, and her arguments cut deep. She didn't just speak for her district. She embodied it, representing a majority black and Hispanic population that trusted her to fight hard and speak truth without compromise. What made her such a threat to people like Scott was her unique blend of legal skill, media savvy, and an unshakable connection to the real world. She wasn't interested in political theater or bipartisanship for its own sake, and she definitely wasn't going to be told by Republicans what was best for the communities she had lived and served and defended her entire life. The moment had come. The stage was set, and Jasmine Crockett was more than ready to turn the tables in spectacular fashion, unlike many politicians who seemed disconnected from the real struggles of everyday Americans. Jasmine Crockett had grown up in South Dallas and understood firsthand what it meant to face poverty, discrimination, and the daily challenges of working families. Her political style was not built on rhetoric alone, but on relentless preparation and purpose. Her staff was known across the Hill for compiling extensive briefing books for every hearing, every meeting, and every single public appearance. She understood better than most that as a black woman in Congress, she would always be held to a higher standard than many of her colleagues. So she made it her mission to always be the most prepared person in every room. This drive wasn't just professional pride. It was a survival strategy in an institution still dominated by white men, many of whom quietly or openly searched for reasons to dismiss or diminish her. What was unfolding inside that packed Senate hearing room wasn't just another exchange between two lawmakers. It was a clash of philosophies on how black Americans should engage with power and government. Tim Scott represented a conservative approach, work within the existing system, focus on personal responsibility, and avoid shaking the table too hard. Jasmine Crockett embodied a progressive approach, challenged the system, demand structural change, and never apologized for fighting hard. The room was filled with staffers, lobbyists, and reporters who could feel that something consequential was building. Social media had already caught wind of the tension between the two, and clips from earlier in the hearing were circulating quickly. For Scott, this was supposed to be a strategic takedown attack. The young freshman Democrat score points with his base and reassert his standing in Republican politics. He had experience, seniority, and the kind of institutional respect that came with a Senate title. But for Crockett, this moment meant something deeper. This was about showing that the new generation of Democrats wasn't here to be polite or intimidated by old guard Republicans. She had already endured patronizing attitudes from male colleagues, and she was no longer in the mood to tolerate it. The stakes were national. Republicans were desperate to chip away at black voter support, while Democrats were working to energize their progressive-based political strategists on both sides were watching closely, because the way these two figures handled this confrontation could shape campaign messaging and party strategies going forward. Adding another layer of complexity was the fact that both Scott and Crockett were under microscopes within their own party's Republican leadership. Had grown frustrated with Scott's inability to effectively push back against progressive arguments about race and policy. His presidential campaign had fallen flat in part because he failed to present a compelling conservative vision for black America that could move beyond a Republican base. This hearing was his chance to reclaim relevance on the Democratic side. Crockett represented the future of the party. She was young, unapologetically progressive, connected to voters, and understood how to command attention in the digital age. Party leaders were eager to see how she would handle her first big face-off against a senior Republican, especially one who shared her racial identity but held completely opposing political values. No one in that room, however, was prepared for what Jasmine Crockett was about to unleash. The moment came during what had been a relatively routine discussion about community development financial institutions. Scott had been questioning witnesses about federal programs before suddenly pivoting toward Crockett, who sat just a few seats away from him. "You know what, Representative Crockett," he said, his tone shifting into something that made the entire room tense. "I've been listening to you talk about helping communities for months now, but what have you actually accomplished besides making noise on social media?" The words hit like lightning. Committee hearings rarely featured direct member-to-member confrontations across party lines. Staffers snapped to attention. Reporters began frantically typing, and C-SPAN caught every flicker of reaction. Scott leaned back in his chair with the smug confidence of a man who thought he had landed a brutal punch. "I mean, I've been in Congress for over a decade. I've passed real legislation that helps real people. All I see from you is tweets and TikToks and viral moments." Whereas the substance's voice dripped with condescension. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a public challenge to Crockett's credibility and legitimacy as a lawmaker. The tone made it clear Scott saw himself as a serious, experienced legislator and her as a lightweight influencer with no depth. What Scott didn't understand was that he had just stepped into a trap that had humbled many politicians before him. He mistook visibility for vanity, assuming that Crockett's online presence was just show, not realize it was a carefully honed weapon designed to amplify real policy work, not replace it. While Scott spoke, Crockett remained stone. Face calm, composed, but observant. Her jaw tightened slightly. Her pen was set down deliberately, and she fixed her eyes directly on Scott. A hush spread across the room, but Scott kept pushing, emboldened by what he misread as her inability to respond. The committee chairman tried to interject, but Scott waved him off. "No, I think this is important," he insisted. "We have serious work to do here, and I'm tired of grandstanding, Representative Crockett. You represent a district with real problems: poverty, crime. Education challenges your constituents deserve better than someone more interested in going viral than governing the line cross into dangerous territory. A veteran politician should have known better. Attacking someone's competence is one thing, but implying they don't care about their constituents is a direct insult to their character." Republican staffers began nervously texting, sensing their boss might have gone too far Democratic. Aides were equally busy, some worried that Crockett might falter, while others knew she was simply preparing for the moment that would define the hearing online. The response was instant. The clip of Scott's remarks began spreading like wildfire. Tim Scott and Jasmine Crockett were trending across platforms. Political commentators from both ends of the spectrum raced to react. Conservatives cheered, thinking Scott had scored a long overdue hit on progressive posturing. Liberals warned that Scott had just underestimated a rising star. The comment sections filled with fire emojis and popcorn gifs as the political world waited for Crockett to respond. Some wondered if she had been rattled. Others, who knew her well, understood the truth. She was waiting, biding her time, gathering her ammunition, and about to launch a response that would silence the room and leave her critics stunned. Scott mistook her silence for submission and pushed even further. "Look, Representative Crockett, I'm not trying to be mean here. I'm just saying, if you want to be taken seriously in this institution, you need to focus on results, not social media followers. Maybe you could learn something from those of us who have actually been doing this work for a while." The patronizing tone was now so thick it was suffocating. A senior Republican senator was essentially lecturing a freshman black congresswoman on how to do her job in front of national cameras and a live audience. What Scott failed to see was that his final words were not a knockout punch. They were the opening Crockett had been waiting for, because while he spoke, she had been organizing her thoughts, scrolling through her phone, pulling up receipts, and preparing to deliver a response so sharp, so devastating, that it would dominate headlines across the country and permanently shift perception of who really held the power in that room.